So thanks for sticking with us after lunch. I realized I've got the best. Yeah, I use this one? Okay. Is it on? It didn't seem like it was on. Up here? There we go. Okay, that on? All right. Thanks for sticking around after lunch. That's really loud. I'm going to have to modulate. So I did want to start off by saying I've probably rewritten this talk about 4 times this morning because every time I think I have something to cover, one of the other speakers has covered it. So I'm just giving up and I'm going to give a talk on euthanasia instead. Just kidding. I'm going to try and go with the original here. Today, what I decided to do is I wanted to use a format that's kind of based on the Mythbusters. Does everybody remember the Mythbusters? It's a great TV show, except when they got rid of the guys, I got a little disappointed in them, Miss Carrie and all them. But what the show, if you're not familiar with the show, what they do is they take commonly held myths and then they go ahead and explore them and they try and do their best to try and figure out whether those myths are true or not. And so what I thought I would do is I would tackle rodent and rabbit enrichment today with that Mythbuster finding. So we'll figure out which button to push. There we go. All right, so we're going to start off with an easy one. For those of you who know me and who've talked about enrichment, one of my first things that I love to talk about is how do we assess well-being? How do we make sure that the well-being of the animals is actually being protected, and how do we achieve that goal? So my first myth, because I think a lot of people think this, is it's easy to evaluate animal well-being. And by calling it a myth, I'm not saying it's true or not. I'm just saying here's the first myth that we're going to address. So when we're talking about the parameters of animal well-being, a lot of the things that we're talking about are very subjective. This is an old Far Side cartoon with what dogs hear and what cats hear. Dogs hear blah, 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 Fido, blah, blah, blah. Cats hear nothing. So it's the communication that going to illustrate interspecies communication, because it's really not possible. We don't speak dog, we don't speak cat, we don't speak rat, we don't speak mouse. Another example, I raise these guys on my farm. They go out and graze in the vineyard and graze weeds for us. This is an Old English baby doll. He is adorable, isn't he? Very cute. Looks like he's smiling, right? He's very happy, right? No, that's anthropomorphizing. The poor guy's face always looks like that, okay? We don't know whether he's happy or sad or what. We have to look at other characteristics to decide whether this guy is happy, even though he has that adorable little grin. And then this is my driving it home illustration of how bad we are at understanding what's going on in another species' heads. We don't even know what's going on in another person's head, right? When I gave this talk a number of years ago, I had stayed at a hotel, and the night before there had been a knockdown drag-out fight with police involved in the room next door to me. And I got to this point in the talk and I said, none of you can tell right now that I got 0 sleep last night, right? Because we're very, very good at masking our behavior and putting forward what we want other people to see. And so it's an incredible amount of hubris for us to say, well, I can tell that the mouse is in pain, or I can tell that the mouse is in distress, when we can't even tell if the person sitting across the table from us is in pain or distress, right? So this is something I think about a lot. It would be awesome if we were all Dr. Dolittle and could figure out how to talk to the animals. I put both generations of Dr. Dolittle there. Some people think that they can. We've got some books like The Straight from the Horse's Mouth. We have had some examples of interspecies communication where it does seem like the species are communicating with one another, but they are very rare, and it takes a lot of work to have that kind of communication happen. And part of the reason why this is so difficult is because language is incredibly difficult. It's not just words. We struggle with that, right? A whole bunch of our communication is the body gestures and the tells, which is why being on a phone conference is so hard, because you can't tell how the person's behaving, look at the body language, and email's even worse because you've removed all of that, the tonal and everything else, because so much of our communication is based on the body language, the tone, etc. Very cultural too. Language has a lot of social and cultural manifestations, and we share intentionality in our language too, which is why, like I kind of alluded to, we stink at it, okay? We pretty much stink at figuring out how to communicate with our own species and then how to communicate with other species. And I just love this slide. We women get the bad knock for this, but it is not just for women. And it is difficult to look at I got the mouse grimace scale up there as an example of things that we're looking for. And for those of you who are not as familiar with that, I frequently see my PIs saying, oh, we're going to use the mouse grimace scale, or I review a paper where they're going to use it. But my question to them always is, how are you doing this? Because if you go in cage side and look at the animal, I guarantee you, you're never going to see anything higher than a 1. Guarantee it. That animal has to be really bad shape. Why? Because that gorilla, that predator coming in and staring at you is going to cause you to perk up and put forward, I'm fine. So the only way that you can accurately do the mouse grimace score is by taking video, going for those stills and then scoring them, because that way you've removed the predator-prey experience from it. And those are things we have to keep in mind, because just your presence, as Kate alluded to earlier, can definitely influence what you're seeing. And then I have a whole nother talk on biases and our perceptions of biases, and this is where I date myself. Does anybody know what that is? It's the Twilight Zone. Okay, love the Twilight Zone. So our biases and our expectations of the world, this is a Twilight Zone episode for those of you who aren't familiar. Aliens come down to Earth, they start taking good care of the people, and give them all the tools they need to solve all their world's problems, solve world hunger, etc., offer to take them to their planet. Everybody's lining up to go get on the spaceship, and they have this book that the aliens had left in the conference room during one of the hearings, and FBI, CIA have been trying to crack the code, and the punchline is at the very end, they come running up and they're like, it's a cookbook. So the perception, the people's biases was that the aliens were doing all this because it was super nice of them. In reality, they were fattening them up, right? And they come back to the island and figure out how to cook them, because the book says to serve man. So they thought that was great, you know, so they're here to serve us and help us. No, to serve man, yeah. So be careful of your biases, because they can definitely get in the way and be a hindrance to you. It might actually end up having you be on that spaceship going off to outer space. So one of the things I tell people when we're doing a welfare assessment is that you need to make sure that you are thinking very carefully about how and why you are measuring what you're measuring, and be very, very careful in that interpretation of that assessment. How am I doing? Get that down? That's fine. So as an example of that, we have 2 different questions here. So this would be, I've been doing a lot of work in CO2 euthanasia, and so this is an example that I've used in talks to show how you have to make sure that you're not bringing your own preconceived biases to it. On the one hand, as we're touching one part of that prophetic elephant, feeling the trunk, we're not saying it's a tree trunk or something like that. We're saying CO2 is definitely more aversive than isoflurane. They leave when concentrations get high, so therefore CO2 has to be bad. But the person who's patting the wall, the side of the elephant, saying, well, they engage in more rearing and digging behaviors than isoflurane, so isoflurane must be worse than CO2. And in both cases, you're looking at 2 different things, but you're not quite getting the whole picture. Nobody's figured out that this is an elephant. Neither one of these has figured out what's the correct welfare for CO2. Which is where the research becomes so important, and knowing what you're asking and why you're asking it is critical. Let's see. Oh, go. Okay. So to do that, what we do is we look at all of these different things and the interactions between these different things, the body, the mind, and the nature. And a good balanced welfare study will look at at least two of these 3 things. If you're only looking at one, you're missing part of the picture. So you definitely do need to look at at least 2 of them. What do I mean by examples of those things? If you're looking at the body, you're going to have kind of looking at behavior, you're going to have objective assessments like open field, mazes, novel objects, etc. Passive behavior, preference testing, all of these things can give you information about the animal's behavior and their natural behavior and how they're interacting with the world. When you're looking at the body itself, you can look at things like reproductive success, body weight, organ weights, things like that can give you a lot of information about how the welfare of the animal's changed over time. Some of those are premortem, some of them are postmortem. Getting at the nature is a lot harder, requires a lot more attention, a lot more difficult. getting at that emotional state and the affective state of the animal. So a couple of examples that we've used in my lab include cognitive bias assessment, where you ask the animal to make a judgment bias, and that helps you determine whether they're in a positive affective state of optimism or a negative affective state of pessimism. Learning, how fast they learn, can also give you some clues into that as well. But these are all tools that you have at your disposal. But the combination of those tools is what gives you the ability to understand the valence of whether you're looking at a eustress or distress or something that you need to be concerned about or not. And that is my 2-minute, 5-minute welfare talk. There could be a heck of a lot more of it. So I guess the first question is, what do you guys think? Myth 1, it's easy to evaluate animal well-being after all that. No? Yeah? Who's all ready to go home, right? Yeah, that one's busted. So it is, there they are. So that one is definitely busted. It is not easy to look at animal welfare, and that's why we have such great stimulating discussions around this, because it is such a complicated topic. So, all right, thanks to Kate this morning, I get to breeze through this a little bit faster at Myth 2. Mice should always be socially housed. What do we think? Were y'all asleep during her talk? I know, it was early in the morning, there wasn't enough caffeine yet. I'm going to give you 2 examples that I have to build off of hers. They're older examples, but I like them just because they do illustrate some of the best differences between especially our best interventions and our best guesses, and our best intentions get in the way sometimes of things. So this is a fascinating little study from 2004, and what they had were these mice that are called AGB mice. They're very, very docile mice, and they put all these mice in these various enriched cages or non-enriched cages, and then measured aggression in the animals and whether it decreased or not. Well, because they were fairly docile mice, there was not really any differences between the animals, so this study didn't show any advantage to the enrichment or any disadvantage to the enrichment. So if you stopped here, you'd go, okay, barren cages are fine, that's it, let's go home, or just as equivalent to the enriched, super enriched cage, right? This one is my all-time favorite story. It's very personal to me because when I was a young and impressionable laboratory animal veterinarian, I was looking at how to enrich animals, and I was gung-ho, let's get these things out here. Everybody knows what these are, right? Igloos with the running wheels. My staff love them. They love watching the mice run on them. So we were getting ready to throw them all out, and I happened to go to a talk where this study was presented, and what they found was that when you put these things into a cage with mice that were already prone to escalated aggression, you actually saw the aggression go up. And the hypothesis was that you were probably giving them now something of value to fight about, in addition to giving them better jumping off spots for jumping and attacking the other mice. So talk about unintended consequences. And when you start thinking about the number of different mouse strains that are out there, so I just showed you 2 extremes. One that's so docile that the enrichment had no change on the aggression that was experienced by the animals. And these ones where you have a significant elevation of the escalated aggression. And last count I saw, last number I was able to find, there were over 500,000 different strains of mice. Good luck, that's why at the back table I was saying I do work on rats. There's a lot fewer of those. It's a lot easier to come up with conclusions for that. But basically what happened when you put this guy in the cage with these animals is you got this. Can you read it? The little guy on the right saying, this could get interesting. There's a nunchuck and a gun being handed down to them. So, which is not what the investigators anticipated or expected to have happen, but it's unfortunately what they ended up seeing. So our best guess intervention is always good. Not always, even though we can always say our intentions had been good. So the intention to give those guys something to work with was definitely a good intention, but in that case it didn't turn out to be good. As I was prepping for this, I've had the pleasure of working with Dr. Alex Whitaker at University of Adelaide on a paper for an upcoming issue of ILAR, and one of our topics was social housing, and I thought she just did a very good job capturing some of the things that the other folks have said today, so I left it in here for you. But I think the biggest thing, the takeaway that she has there, is that if the groups are not stable, those social stresses abound with consequent impact on health, behavior, and physiology. And that's one of the things that we have to keep in mind. It's really easy to say these are social animals, let's put them together, but that unintended consequences can come back and end up with a really bad welfare for that animal if we're not very careful about it. Regardless of the situation, one of the things we do know about mice and rats and other species is that there is a lot of benefit to social housing. Social buffering is a thing. I struggle with it with my stress research because from a humane standpoint, I want to pair house animals, but I often find that if I pair house animals, then the response to my stressors is blunted because they can comfort each other. And that social buffering really does help them deal with aversive stimuli better and make them less vulnerable to that stimuli. So we balance that, whether individual housing versus pair housing or group housing is more important. And that is something that you definitely need to consider. So what's our thought? Mice should always be socially housed? Busted, yeah. That one was busted. It's very much strain dependent, it's very much individual dependent, and you want to be very careful about how you're rolling anything out like that, social housing, enrichment, etc. This one is one I find intriguing. Fighting is always bad, right? We kind of saw, and again, I put this in and then all of a sudden we're talking about fighting. This is my lovely daughter. She would kill me to know that I put this slide in here. She's standing there with John Cleese. That is John Cleese. We went to go see him, and we went backstage so she could meet him. She is home for the summer, and she just adopted 2 guinea pigs. And she was introducing them to 2 guinea pigs that we own, and she about had a nervous breakdown because she was trying to introduce these 2 guinea pigs together, and what she was getting was this. Guinea pig fighting. Has anybody ever seen guinea pig fighting? It's the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life, okay? So I got home and she's like, Mom, watch this. They're gonna hurt each other. I said, guinea pigs cannot hurt each other. It's physically impossible for them to hurt each other. So she put them both in the pen, and they do this amazing rumbly call when they're upset. And so the entire living room was filled with these 4 guinea pigs just doing this loud thumpy call with each other. And the one went and nailed the other one, and she's like, I gotta go stop it. And I said, no, you can't. This is part of them learning who's gonna be in charge and how they're gonna get together. I said, sit down on the sofa with me. I will stop it if I think it's going too far. But I'm like, assure you that nobody's going to die. But I wanted to share this story because it is important as they're coming up with deciding how this new social structure is going to look like. And you've heard multiple speakers talk about that today. Sometimes fighting is okay. And it's necessary for them to do that, to have their understanding of the world. The 4 guinea pigs are now happily living in a pen together. Everybody's fine after the little guinea pig aggression, but it is something. There's videos out there. You don't have to go get guinea pigs and do it yourself. You can actually watch videos of, but they are pretty darn cute. And ironically, when we talk about wrestling and fighting and stuff like that, I'm reminded that we use in the rat world tickling, which is based on play fighting by juvenile rats. And we are actually built an entire research body of showing how that has a benefit to humans, it has a benefit to the animals, the tickling behavior, the heterospecific play. And this kind of wrestling, it's how you learn your way around in the world. And as other speakers have said, the biggest thing is just making sure it's not going too far, intervening before somebody gets hurt, but recognizing what's normal play behavior. And to drive that home, this is that same slide from the igloo study. Escalated aggression is bad. That's when somebody gets hurt. That's when you start seeing the tears on the back of the mouse because they've been fighting, etc. Those are the injuries on the non-human primate. You want to watch for the escalated aggression, but you can have moderated aggression, affiliated interactions. There can be all sorts of things on the spectrum. So you need to understand your species and what kind of behaviors are normal for them when you're making these assessments and deciding whether the behavior that you're seeing is good or not. So what we call fighting is always bad. Busted, not busted? Busted, yeah, we're pretty much busted. 3 for 3 so far, right? Okay. Next, rats are social animals. This is a social housing symposium, so we're gonna start with that. The first thing I like to remind people is a rat is not a mouse. Okay? They are very, 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 very different. How many have had the PI come into the mouse room and say, when are they going to grow up and to be rats? Yeah. They are not the same thing. And for the most part, these guys are little lovers. And you can put them together in a cage and you're not going to see huge amounts of fighting and stuff like that. They do take advantage of social buffering. We know early socialization makes them easier to handle. That tickling works really, really well too. These guys, I've said I love rats, right? They display empathy to each other. There's a lot of really fascinating studies that where we have a lot of similarities to these little guys in how we interact with the world and how they do. But one of the things that concerns me just a little bit, I have always been one who would just throw a couple of rats into a cage, and because there's no fighting, I'd say, okay, that's fine, we're gonna get along. But we did a study a number of years ago. I had some high school students in the lab, and so we thought this would be kind of fun. We had these big ferret cages, and so we had a bunch of pair-housed males and a bunch of pair-housed females. So we took 6 males and 6 females. 6 males went into one cage, 6 females went into the other cage. They'd all been pair-housed up until this time. The girls thought this was the best thing ever. They grabbed each other's hands, they went exploring all over the cage. They were like, oh, come check out the little, hammock and all this kind of stuff. The boys all went to their own corner. We had urine in the sleeping areas, defecation in the food dishes. These men were absolutely stressed out by the situation of housing that we put them in. These were all grown adult animals. And so how much of that was because they were set in their ways with the two, I don't know. But it did make me be a little more thoughtful that maybe sometimes when we're just mixing these guys, they get along because they have no choice. But if they actually had more room and had more choice, these males might not quite be as happy with each other. And we probably do need to spend a little more time paying attention to that. We know from rodent societies that groups of males are what they would do or groups of females are what they would do in the wild. So it's not too surprising that my girls all got along, but you wouldn't necessarily have bachelor boys together. And so that's probably why that was a very stressful situation for them. So again, one size does not always fit one species, one sex, or anything like that. More to be cognizant about. So what do we think? These social guys, busted, not busted? Plausible. You forgot they had one in the middle, didn't you? So it's plausible. In most of the situations, they probably are very social animals, and they do get along very well, but we do need to be a little bit cautious about some circumstances that they're at. Now I'm going to talk enrichment a little bit for rats. Are rat cages tall enough to allow normal postures? No, there's a lot of head shaking, right? So if you look at all of our guidelines, they basically are about 7 inches tall. An adult rat, when they're standing, can be 10 to 12 inches tall. So most of us have probably gone into an animal facility and seen something like this, where you come in and they want to sniff the air around you, and they have this little hunchback. It's not comfortable. I stand 5'9", and I say, whenever I look at them like this, I feel like I'm in one of those ships where they were built for the people who are 4 feet tall, so you have to walk like that the whole time. There's some problems, and we probably want a height that's a little bit more like this, but this is probably not the most reasonable for a lab animal facility, right? Because we're trying to do bioprotection and all this kind of stuff, so there's that balance between all those things that we have to do. But let's just start easy. Is this busted or not? 7 inches good? Not good? I'm seeing no, so I agree. I'd call that one busted. But what I would say is there are some caveats. You do have to be careful with what you are doing. So a number of years ago, I ran a study, and I have not even been able to figure out what to do with the data from this study because it was so wonky. But we used these cages to explore cage height in rats. And they're plexiglass cages knocked together with epoxy and plexiglass. We fed rats on the bottom. They lived in these. The one on the right is a 7-inch tall, but much bigger floor space. The one on the right, or the one on the left, is twice the height, so it's about a 15-inch tall cage. And what we found was that in this case, I didn't find any consistencies on welfare or not, and I think a huge chunk of that is because, can you guys see what's missing from a standard cage? A lid? Yeah. So notice the light intensity on that cage? They didn't get it. There was no place for these guys to hide. So what we had in this study was a whole bunch of really stressed out rats, And I don't think it had anything to do with the height of the cage or the size of the cage. It was because they just had no place to go. In our standard caging, you have that wire top plus or minus a filter top, so they're shadowing in the cage, so if it's too bright, they can get someplace else. Whereas in this caging, they had no place to go, which was an unfortunate part of our experimental design. This mouse is going to be the death of me. So yeah, so we had a negative emotional affective state in our rats here. We did a follow-up study using this caging system. This paper is out there, it's been published. We actually found that when you gave them access to the multi-level caging, you improved the affective state of the animals. And there were prolonged effects, improvements in animal health and well-being with the use of this cage. So this paper is out there with this cage. There are now multiple cages out there on the market. The thing that I want to make sure that everybody remembers is no one specifically looked at markers of well-being in all of these cages. Why am I bringing that up? Because just because the multi-level worked in one cage system doesn't mean that it's going to work for others. Remember the law of unintended consequences? Often we look at these and we go, we say, I'm happy, but we don't ask the question, are they happy, right? It looks good to us. And my case in point for this one is, everybody knows what these are? Everybody know? These are tunnels that we use pretty frequently in rats and mice. They're red and they're yellow because rats and mice don't see very well in that spectrum. So the logic here goes that those things look opaque to them, so they can go hide in them. So there's a whole lot of literature that shows that basically preference tests saying that rats and mice prefer these. When you put them in a cage, they spend a lot of time in them. But what we found with some of the work in our lab is that cage color can have unintended consequences too. And we actually have some interesting results that suggest that those shelters result in animals that are more stressed than animals that didn't have the shelters in the first place. And part of the reason why we think that is because that red color seems to be good. This is a cage tinting color study that we did. And you can see down here, we had a clear cage, a yellow cage, and a red cage. The red cage is shown there. We had a decrease in heart rate, so that would indicate that these animals were less stressed, right? Theoretically, if you're just using one physiologic parameter, why you do two. So if we just looked at heart rate, we would have said yellow and red cages are a refinement over clear cages, go forth and make red and yellow cages, and that will make your animals better. When we look at the neutrophil lymphocyte ratio, and neutrophil lymphocyte ratio, as the neutrophils go up and lymphocytes go down, that correlates with corticosterone production. So that's evidence of chronic stimulation of the HPA, the higher the neutrophil lymphocyte ratio is. And if you notice, our reds are significantly elevated compared to the clear and the yellow. We looked at this a lot and we realized one of the things that we think is going on based on empirical observations as we were in the rooms working with these animals is these guys in the red cages, the guys in the clear and the guys in the yellow would do what those other rats were doing. They would come up to the cage when you came in to see you. Guys in the red cages would keep sleeping. They didn't see you. And so what we suspect we have going on here is that every time we went in to do a cage change or pull them out, we scared the heck out of them because they didn't know we were coming. And so they were getting random intermittent stress, which then translated into an elevated neutrophil lymphocyte ratio. So with both pieces of information, we now say, okay, maybe yellow is a good idea, not necessarily red. And we've seen similar findings with the intercage shelters too, across species with rats and mice. Ooh, what just happened? With rats and mice. And we're still trying to tease that out because it's such an unexpected finding, given that they like spending so much time in those cages, to see that there's actually maybe some adverse responses from a welfare perspective is kind of an interesting thing. So remember, when you see this new technology, because one of the things that really cracked me up is I presented that cage color data, didn't crack me up in a good way, I presented that cage color data at a national ALAS meeting, and within 2 years, all the major cage manufacturers had red cages out there based on my work and Dauchi's work. And it's like, guys, we haven't characterized this yet, so why are we running before we can walk? And that's a problem, is people see something that looks good and they just start running with it. And we really do need to make sure that it is a refinement before we all start spending a lot of money on it. And to keep us real, keep us in our Mythbusters, a little word about scientific evaluations. There's Adam Savage, if you guys haven't known. Remember, kids, the only difference between screwing around in science is writing it down. I say that because, again, a lot of people say, well, they're sitting in we're using, they're using the XYZ toy. That means it's a good thing. You're screwing around at that point. You really need to be designing an experiment and actually testing a hypothesis before you make your conclusions. So, but that's definitely, that's Adam's, his best advice for us. All right, myth 6. I thought I was going to get to do this one. We already did it, but I have a spin on it. Rats do or don't build nests. Now, my punchline's been taken because you already heard, right? Right? Yeah, so they do. They definitely do. If you look in the wild, rats definitely do nests. We even recognize that they do nests because what's a messed up hair? What did your mom say? How did you get such a rat's nest in your hair, right? Yeah. So why we think that rats don't build nests is beyond me, because we do definitely know that they do. But it's a very, very independent thing. So a number of years ago, we ran a study where we gave these long Evans the little nestlet squares, and you can see they just kind of walked over them. We gave them an entire sheet and they just slept under them. Poor little guys just didn't know what to do with those. We gave them the shredded bedding, and the same thing, they just kind of trampled it. That one kind of started to make a little nest out of it. We gave sprags the same nesting material, and they trashed those little nestlets. They started chewing them up, and so we're closer to what you're supposed to do with these. The intended purpose when we hand them to a rat or a mouse is you're supposed to destroy it. And when we gave them the EnviroDry kind of material, they actually built a fairly decent nest. You can't really quite appreciate that, but there's actually 2 of them in there. But they're just they've made such a good little home that you can only see the one who's coming out of the cage. And then this picture is from CAAT, and I love it too because it's a brown Norway and his cute little nest too. So definitely they do, but there's a lot of variation in the success of that nest building across rat species, rat strains. So that one's definitely one that you have to do a lot of trial and error by. So what do we think? Do rats build nests? Yes, right? We're going to say plausible, because not everybody does. Remember, my long Evans were completely lost in using it as a blanket. So you got to be careful. But I will say a rat is not a mouse, remember? Right? So as long as I'm on the theme of nesting material, how about mice and nests? What do we think? Confirmed, yeah, that one is pretty much definitely confirmed. There is a whole host of literature that shows that mice this is something you can really do to help improve their well-being, is give them nesting material. The bang for your buck, the ROI is amazing. And it really doesn't matter what strain of mouse. Of course, there's exceptions with 500,000 different strains of mice. There are going to be some who can't figure out what to do with that stuff, but for the vast majority of them, it is a good thing. And so if you're not using nesting material in your enrichment right now, I would highly recommend that you reconsider that. All right, let's talk bunnies. So, rabbits prefer social housing. This is a review now, right? Because we've already talked about this, right? So, please help me, I'm bored. This is pretty much what the rabbit world looks like, or has looked like historically, right? I mean, we have this cage. If they're lucky, they have that little shelf in there, so they have a place where they can jump, hide, whatever. If they're super lucky, this panel is removed and they have the full cage and maybe a friend with them too. But this has kind of been the way to go for housing rabbits. And this is probably a better way to house them, with all the caveats of making sure that you've got compatible groups and you're not introducing additional stressors by putting them in those groups. It does take a little bit of work, but I chose these 2 pictures because they have some things that I think help make things successful in my experience. If you make sure there's enough hidey places for them, so there's a place where everybody can go, everybody has a little tunnel, everybody has a little hut where they can go and get away from everybody else when they need to, it works really, really well. I've group housed rabbits in dog runs in the past, and I've set up successful groups of 5 female rabbits, and I've only had one group that broke down enough where I had to pull a female out because she was getting beat up very bad by everybody else, and that was just an incompatible group. So we pulled her out, healed her up, and tried again with a different group, and she did much better. So definitely possible. It just does take a lot of time. And this is where we're going to hopefully have a little late afternoon humor. Look familiar? Because rabbits, rabbits are quite vicious creatures. Now, do you understand why I brought John Cleeson to everything earlier? So There is, if you have not worked with rabbits very much, there is a lot of truth to Monty Python, okay? I have seen a rabbit come out of a cage at somebody's head before, so you do have to be careful. And especially with they can do a lot of damage with those particular back feet. Again, I live in the country. I have a farm. One of my daughter's friends one day presented at our house at like 10 o'clock at night because her 2 male rabbits had been fighting, and one of them was now hemi-castrated and bleeding all over the place. And so I finished the castration on my dryer to help the poor guy out. But this is a reality with housing rabbits, and you have to be aware of it because that's that escalated aggression that you don't want to have happen. And unlike the guinea pigs who really can't do anything to each other, these guys can do some very serious damage to each other. So be cautious of that. Be cognizant of the individuals and making sure that you've got a stable group before you go too far. So rabbits prefer social housing. What are we calling this one? Plausible? I'd agree. I came up with plausible. Yeah, there's a lot of, whenever you have all those caveats, it's yes, but. So you definitely have to have some caveats. And nobody mentioned this one, so I'm bringing this one in. Rabbits like music. We heard that, mice and our rats don't like music, but rabbits like music. What do you guys think of that? There's actually a CD out there for pet melodies for rabbits. You can get it on Amazon. And we completed a study where you can see here that it actually did improve their well-being. So these were our results. We took a baseline fecal cortisol in our bunnies to see where they were at, and you could see the cortisol was quite high with no music. We played this bunny melodies CD for 6 months in the rabbit room during light hours, not during night hours, but just during the light cycle. And you can see after 6 months, the fecal cortisol dropped significantly. So we actually saw a very nice improvement. We pulled the music, waited another 6 months, and you can see they were right back up where they used to be. Now that said, you have to be careful about your music. So this is not necessarily an endorsement of the rabbit pet melody, but I can tell you based on my personal experience, big and rich is bad, okay? Big and rich is bad. So is honky tonk, okay? Most of us in Oregon, where I was at, we would, the rabbits we would get from a rabbitry were used to playing country music in the background. So we would play country music in the background in our rabbit room because they were used to that. And one day we learned that the rabbits were getting very, very agitated and not easy to handle. And it corresponded with the time when the big hillbilly rock took off. And so when we changed the radio station back to a classic country, they were much better. So the same daughter who was with John Cleese was ready to make Johnny Cash CDs for the rabbits to help make things calmer. But that deep bass, that deep rockin' bass. And then we're pretty sure that that's what it was, because about a year later, the rabbits started acting agitated again. And when we investigated, we found out the young man that we'd hired to go work in the rabbit room, when he was working in the rabbit room, he would change to his punk rock station. While he was working, he would turn it back to the country station when he was done. Very kind of him. But the rabbits didn't appreciate the punk rock while he was cleaning. So these pet melodies CDs are basically kind of based on the cardiovascular responses. So they have melodies that match the heart rate. So it kind of is soothing for the animals is the theory that they're using. But what we found was interesting is it did seem to work with the rabbits. So rabbits like music. I said confirmed. But you just have to make sure there's not that driving, pulsy beat. So, all right. So bringing it home, some conclusions today for us and some conclusions from the Mythbusters. Reject reality. One of their biggest things is I reject your reality and substitute my own. That's another Adam Savage saying, but definitely do reject reality. It is okay to ask questions, and we really do need to ask questions. We don't want to assume that the guide or anything else is correct. I tell students who come and work in my lab that I love having students in the lab because they have fresh eyes and they ask questions. And I want them to ask questions because when they say, well, why do you do X, Y, Z? If I can't say we do it because studies have shown that this is improving animals' welfare, then that might be a research idea for us right there. If my answer is because we've always done it this way or I don't know, those are not good answers. We really do need to make sure that we're doing things for a positive reason and improving the welfare. Talk to people outside of the field. That whole cage tinting color came out of a conversation with my husband, who's an electrical engineer, and I was telling him about the huts one day, and he said, well, why don't you just make the whole cages red or yellow? Why are you just doing the huts? And I went, I don't know why we don't do that. But when you talk to other people about what you do and why you do it, they start poking holes in why you do it. I came back 2 days later and said it would screw up the circadian rhythm, and he went, what are you talking about? Because he'd completely forgotten our conversation. But I also would point out that talking to other people helps you find tools that you can use to do these investigations. Some of our other great studies, some of the best collaborations I've had have been with Joe Garner and Brianna Gaskill, behaviorists, because they come at problems from a different perspective than I do as a veterinarian. So I find that together we make the science stronger. We had a really great study when I had a forensic science undergrad rotating through the lab, and we were trying to figure out how you could tell whether rats were gnawing on devices or not, and she actually suggested we use this thing called Fabius paper, which identifies saliva at crime scenes, and it worked. So we have a technical paper out there showing that rat saliva and mouse saliva, you can detect it with this Fabius paper, but urine doesn't trigger the paper. So it really is triggering off this, the amylase in the saliva, which is what it does for human settings too. But we never would have thought of that if we hadn't had a gal who was big onto crime scene. And when you think about it, welfare assessments at the cage level is crime scene investigation. There's nobody around there who can tell you what happened. You got to figure out what's going on. So a lot of us are using black light and other things like that, tools that crime scene folks use to help understand what you can do to what's going on in that cage. So think outside of your discipline for darn sure. And remember your goal when you're doing enrichment, whether it's social or manipulanda. You are aiming for positive, not negative or neutral. So negative is usually pretty easy to see. That's when the animal has an injury or something like that. We go, oh, that's bad, pull that. Neutral is harder. Neutral's harder. Neutral's when we feel good, but the animal could care less about what we've done as an intervention. And this is where I put my director hat on. I have limited resources that I can use to enrich animals in the facility. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that what I'm putting into that cage or how I'm interacting with that animal has value to the animal. Because if not, I'm just wasting money. I may be making my staff feel better, maybe not. But if I'm not doing something to improve the animal's well-being, then I might as well just go home. So finding things that we can do that definitely make sure that you've improved the animal's well-being is the goal that we should be looking for as we're designing these studies. Okay, reminder, the only difference between science and screwing around is writing it down, okay? So, and then take-home message number 2. All right, I've been told I should just call this Deb Hickman's law. Thou shalt never perform a welfare study that evaluates only one component. So you need to, if you're doing a true welfare assessment, you're looking at basic health, effective states, and or natural living. At least 2 of those things to help you get the complete picture so that you don't miss something that you're supposed to be missing. And it could be a very important piece of that puzzle. And with that, love that. Remember that. Don't try what you're about to see at home. We're what you call experts, the Mythbusters. And are there any questions for me? Taking you guys way back, right?